episode of FastForward U presents Start Here, a podcast dedicated to entrepreneurship and innovation right outside of Johns Hopkins University. I'm your host, Carrie Ingram, the marketing coordinator with FastForward U, and as always, at least lately, our intros for this podcast have been pretty short just because these are pre-recorded Zoom virtual podcasts before we were back in person, and they're brought to you by our former FastForward U student program coordinator, Kevin Carter. Today's episode is a really exciting one, and it's with a mentor that we have worked with a ton at FastForward U. She is super helpful, she's super honest, and we really love getting every bit of information we can from Miss Margaret Roth Falzon. She recently spoke with Kevin Carter on all things about entrepreneurship, about what she is doing in the entrepreneurship community. She's held a lot of different titles and has made a really big impact in Baltimore and beyond, so we were really excited to speak with her this past semester. So here is our past interview, now going live with Margaret.
I am very excited to introduce our next guest in this Founder Journey series, which is Margaret Roth Falzon, who is currently the Director of Portfolio Operations at Squadra Ventures. But each time I've had the pleasure of introducing Margaret at a FastForward U event, the remarks have dramatically been altered. That's because Margaret excels at wearing many different hats throughout her career and her day-to-day life. For example, she spent over 5 years as co-founder and chief success officer for Yet Analytics, which is a data analytics and training platform now for national defense organizations. After leaving Yet, she took the opportunity to flex her writer's muscle and joined Technically Baltimore as a great guest columnist, conducting interviews and covering all the happenings within our city's entrepreneurship ecosystem. But now, the newest hat on top of her head is an investor's cap, as last year, Margaret joined the newly minted VC firm Squadra Ventures as its Director of Portfolio Operations. So across all of these roles, I think Margaret brings creativity, empathy, and just a realness to the ventures and the people that she interacts with. And through that skill set and her passion for seeing the team she's involved with succeed, they most often do succeed. So I really can't wait to dive into the dozens of questions I have for her and learn about all the hats that she does wear. So please give a warm welcome to Margaret Roth Falzon.
Well, I'm really happy to be here. It was looking back to last year when I got to speak with you all, or with the students. That was my last physical event that I did. That was the last event. So it's almost exactly a year ago. So it's a fun thing. So thanks for having me. I'm excited to dive in and, pins away.
Yeah, we got you in right under the wire last year. I think you were our last FastForward U in-person event as well. So the historical milestones all around. But let's talk a little bit about your time at Hopkins. So I'm curious because the Hopkins ecosystem has changed a lot, and entrepreneurial ecosystem changed a lot in even the last 5 years. But what was it like when you were a student, and did you work on any ventures or see yourself as an entrepreneur then?
Yeah, so when I was a student, there was no Hopkins Ventures. There was it just wasn't, and not that there wasn't a lot of creative energy and students coming up with new ideas. And I have a few classmates that did start businesses while they were students, but there wasn't the infrastructure that's built around you all now. So there wasn't JHTV, there wasn't FastForward. I think the last year that I graduated in 2011 and then did a master's in teaching in 2012. So I think that last year, 2012, was the first year that they started having some, FastForward started becoming a thing, as now. But I think one of the big things at Hopkins when I was there, and I think there was a lot of support and resources put around people who want to have some type of leadership growth. Lots of opportunity for people to develop as leaders and really learn to work as a group. And I think that was how to work as good teams together. That was probably the most critical skill coming out of undergrad that I think I use all the time. And that learning how to work as a group, and then also how to explain what you do to people who don't know about it. And I think with there being so many different disciplines and so many different things people can study, it makes you, even within your own friend groups, you might have someone who's studying or who's going to be Chem BE, somebody who's a mechanical engineer. I was an English major, so many different things that people are working on that you have to learn how to talk about to each other, even though maybe you don't know a lot about it.
Yeah, that's a big motif we're trying to drive home here, especially when it comes to medtech ventures that have to explain what they're doing to someone that has no idea what they're doing or any of the jargon. But it's not limited to that too. I think everyone tends to get up in their own world at times with the jargon they use and realize, oh, not everyone innately knows what I'm saying. So I think it's a very useful skill to be able to communicate across professions and across just levels of understanding. But it sounds like Hopkins didn't have a ton of resources. It's hard to like fall into the world of entrepreneurship, like if you're at like a MIT or Berkeley, where it just bites you automatically. How did you find your way into entrepreneurship, and specifically with analytics?
I'm on my 10-year reunion committee, so it actually is literally a decade ago now, which I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around. But so at this time, this was sort of things like Techstars or startup weekends, sort of these sort of drop-in experiences where people were trying to say, how do we take Silicon Valley out of Silicon Valley and go bring it to other places? So imagine it's sort of like a road show. Startup weekend was like, we're going to be in Vancouver, then we're going to go to New York, then we're going to go to Baltimore, and sort of this trip. People didn't sit down and say like, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur or I want to study entrepreneurship. It was still that it wasn't like its own discipline, if you will, now, like it is now, or something that you can talk about, sort of has this whole framework around it. So I didn't think about myself as an entrepreneur. I think I sort of wandered my way into an opportunity where we sort of had this interesting idea for a technology. We had proven out something else. So I helped, the first thing that I helped start up was actually a high school student tech center. So we took an abandoned rec center over from Baltimore City and turned it into a tech center with after school programming for students around all kinds of maker education and early, learning how to code. And so sort of from starting up that program, and that was a, physical space, curriculum, lots of students that you're interacting with, and then sort of seeing a way to develop a platform out of this. We just kind of left. Like, it's not like there's not a glamorous story behind this. This is sort of like, oh, we're done doing the nonprofit thing and we've gotten it to a place where it's ready to go. It doesn't need us anymore. And so we left and said, let's spend 6 months on this and see what we make out of it, like see what we can do. And we actually, like in that 6 months, we wound up getting the TEDCO funding, which is the Technology and Economic Development Commercialization Fund of Maryland. And that was our first funding, and that's how we got to get into the Emerging Technology Center, which is the city's incubator, and kept, it's one foot in front of the other, like one thing, one customer, one proof point, next funding, that all sort of built on top of each other.
Yeah, definitely it does to have that solid base, but it seems also that it's pretty much never linear in terms of how you're getting there, despite the one foot in front of the other. I was reading about the early stages of Yet, where your background in teaching and education. Originally, the idea was to build this like social learning platform, right? And then eventually, you've dove into this world of data interoperability based on a problem you discovered. Could you just talk about how you and the founding team thought through that decision to we have to zig or zag, but we can't keep going straight? What was that process?
Yeah, this is also decade-old technology now, but so this was when the idea of the social learning platforms, and this is like there's no online learning is not good. It's like all forum based. There's no such thing as Coursera or any of these other tools that you all use or that maybe even use in high school, but. So our idea was in the same way that students are trying to learn across many different platforms, and we're trying to move more education onto not just online, but more interactive. So my co-founder actually, he was also a teacher, and his students were, I don't know if anyone remembers this, but at the time that the Arab Spring happened, his students actually wound up being featured in the New York Times because they were sourcing news from the people on the ground in those cities and then learning about it. So they were learning what it was really like over there in real time. And it was this moment of like, how do we have all these walls of, why do we try to build up these artificial walls around what people are learning and what people are teaching, when the tools to be the most interconnected, we've never been able to be more interconnected than we can today. And so that was really a big part of the inspiration point around where the company was headed, because we said, how do we actually connect those platforms and tools for teachers? And we set out to make a sort of a unified platform where teachers could exchange resources for students and professional development for themselves. And what we realized was the problem wasn't the interface, if you will. The problem was, how do we actually measure and understand the data behind all of those learning experiences and connect them together so that we can understand what's making an impact, what do we need to reinforce, what could be better. So it was shifting from putting the user experience first, if you will, or sort of like the interface first, to really honing down into what is the true problem that our customers are facing. And so once we realized that the problem wasn't the portal, the problem was the data, that's when we shifted to really being one of the first data interoperability platforms. And so we pivoted to actually collecting and connecting the data behind all these different systems, and then presenting that into a unified data dashboard for different types of stakeholders. That allowed us to serve many more customers, because now it wasn't just education and teachers and schools. It was Herman Miller, it was MasterCard, it was other learning and development training organizations within the Fortune 1000. So it allowed us to, because that was a core problem that they were facing as well. This is everything people hear about, what resources are going to employees, or to support employees and organizations. So as we shifted to that, we also then at the same time got approached by a division of the DoD to translate our technology to help support warfighters in the field and on something called the Personal Assistant for Learning, the PAL, which is to help people in different federal roles be able to access the knowledge and information that they need at different times. So then we sort of went very much into the government sector as well. And at that time, I was like, okay, we're pretty set up in these different verticals. We actually shifted most of our business over to government contracting. And I like the chaotic, messy part of startups. So I said it was time for me to leave. And that's when, so my business partner, our CEO, continues on, and the company's doing well. So it's time for me to find what I wanted to do next.
So you shifted out of Yet, you wrote for a bit, and then this opportunity to join, I think, is it still fair to call it the newest VC firm in Baltimore?
I think we're probably the most new right now. I think so. We're about a year and a half in to being a fund. So Squadra is a early stage venture fund. We're on our first fund, which is $25 million fund. We mostly invest in what's called dual use ventures. So that's companies that have an application to commercial and to government or national security needs. So as you can see, sort of my background and how Yet Analytics wound around makes a lot of sense. And then the other half is we look at things that are what we call enterprise with impact. So where if the company wins, there's a greater impact as well in some type of way for the end users.
Yeah, thanks for describing that investment thesis. But what exactly does a director of portfolio operations do within a venture capital firm?
Yeah, so this is like a new thing. So I was actually the first portfolio ops person in DC or Baltimore, I think, based on our overview assessment. This is sort of a new role in venture funds. So as with many funds, if you've looked at or heard other investors talk or seen their websites, they always say we want to add value, right? We're value adding. We have our relationships bring things to the table for the startups, and a lot of that, and sort of why I, ultimately decided I did want to join the venture side to sort of shift from the entrepreneur side to the venture side was, so Guy Filipelli, our managing partner, and he and also Baltimore DC area 3-time exit founder. He ran a company called Red Owl Analytics. So we were in the analytics bubble together for a few years there, but both of us did not have exceptional experiences with our investors. So director of portfolio operations is if there's the investment side of the fund, which is people who are sourcing deals, they're reviewing pitches, they're evaluating, they're doing diligence. Portfolio ops, and that's before the check is written. Portfolio operations is or just before the check is written, and then fully after the check is written. So I work with our companies before we invest to sort of build out a joint strategic plan of what are the 5 or 6 big initiatives that we're going to work on together over the next 18 months, and how are those really going to move the business forward. And then portfolio operations in general really focuses on sort of 3 big things, which is 1, making sure that there's a solid foundation. All the foundational elements of the business are solid. So for example, we often bring in an outsourced CFO to join our companies, because a great CEO cannot also be a great CFO at the same time. They can't, it's antithetical, they can't do that. We do a lot of work around strategic planning and helping execute on strategic initiatives. And then the third part is leadership development, AKA founder therapy. So I spend a lot of time talking and thinking through hard problems with our companies and our management team members and helping them, I like to call it evade mistakes, right? They're always going to, you in the entrepreneurial seat, you as the CEO, know more about your company and what's going on than I ever could or our team ever could. So but we try to give the right advice or ask the right question at the right time to help evade mistakes that we've made before we know that people make often.
Thanks. I think a lot of people think of VCs as that, oh, well, here's your millions of dollars, come back in 5 to 10 years and you better 10x our money. But I think there's so much to be said about a VC that's in the trenches with you, that's willing to go through that strategic plan, connect with the right resources, conduct founder therapy, which I like that as a term. And I mean, Lord knows everyone that goes through it enough, they'll need it. So I think it's a valuable service. But I'm curious, what attracted you specifically to this role? Like, what can you get from working within VC that you can, or at least didn't, from working within a single startup?
So I think and this is like totally honestly, like uniquely to me right now, I think that when, I didn't just take a year off after my company because I wanted to. I definitely needed I like to think of it as a little bit of recovery mode, right? 6 years of a startup is a lot, long hours, lots of stress, lots of just not necessarily putting yourself first. And so when I was looking at what my next role was and what I wanted to do, I'd sort of come down to this conclusion. And I think we get really linear about our career or what we're going to do next or how things should look down the line. And I think that a better way to frame that is, what's the thesis that you're trying to prove out with your time right now? Like, what's the thesis? What's the hypothesis that you're trying to execute on? And if you look at what you're doing from that lens, it doesn't feel so forever. I think we get, and at least Hopkins students, myself included, and many of my friends, we get very we want to plan the thing out and we want to know what's going to happen and we're going to do this and this. And so I think stop that flow and say, what's the thesis I'm trying to prove out with my time? And so for me, what I had come to the conclusion of and what I was absolutely most passionate about and the thing that was always, obviously getting revenue was important. That was my job, but building our team in really the right way was always most important to me, and being very intentional about our culture and how we developed it. I fundamentally believe that if you can influence hires 5 through 15 and do so from a of diversity, equity, and inclusion within how you're building out that team and the members and the recruiting and how you bring them into the culture in a way that it grows because of them, you'll fundamentally change the trajectory of the company. And it's not, I think a lot of people get very, we hear a lot of people talking about, we need to invest more in underrepresented founders. Like, it starts with the founder. Like, yes, everything starts with the founders, But I think the shift that we're all working towards is not necessarily who's funded in the next 2 years. It's all the smart people who come out of the companies, a much more diverse group of people that come out of the startups that they're working at 5 years from now, and then become CEOs themselves. So sort of, I think that's the thing that we're working towards in general. And I'm using we in this like large generalization of like people who work in startups and care about this stuff. And the other thing is like you all are founders, right? So there's your first couple of team members are probably your friends because you trust them already, and they know that you're trustworthy, and they kind of think that you're crazy, but they're like, well, I might as well try it because they're my friend, and like we're gonna see where this goes, right? So it's not this it's not as calculated as hiring. You don't hire your second person. You like convince them / beg them to join you because it's a crazy, risky thing to start doing. But when you get to your fifth person, your sixth person, your seventh person, your 10th person, those people, now you're really building something together, and you can be really, really thoughtful about how you recruit and hire the right people. So that's the thesis that I'm trying to prove out. And the reason why I joined Squadra was because I, knew how Guy had built his companies before, and I knew that this is something that he deeply values as well. And I knew that this was going to be a way for me to work on this thesis with more than one company. So yes, I could have gone into a single startup and tried to influence this from inside, but as a VC and as someone who works across a portfolio of companies, I get to work on this with 6. I have 6 right now. By this time next year, we'll probably have about 12 to 15 companies. And so it's just how do you have an outsized impact in what you're trying to do?
It makes a lot of sense. And I remember.
And I don't want to make the decisions right now. I also am really enjoying not having to be responsible for the decision-making part of it. So
it's a luxury, for sure. And for those, I guess no one was a part of one of your earlier talks because this is an entirely new cohort, but Margaret had this really interesting way of depicting her life and like startup life. I think this was when you were maybe right at the tail end of Yet, and you marked, career milestones, company milestones, and like personal life milestones. And then just like while you're just grinding for like those 4 to 5 years in the middle, it's just like zero personal life growth or developments. I think you got a dog, and one of them you met your now husband. But there was just like so few things. You're like, that's the life that you had to live at that point. But it's nice to know that like whatever situation you're in now, whatever venture you're involved in, it's not a static thing. It does change over time, and you can change it based on your thesis you have.
Yeah, I do have a photo. I did take a picture of that whiteboard. I had like whiteboarded it out as a way to explain,
really
visually explain it. But so it was but let that be a reminder, like don't totally let your personal life slide. That is something that if I could go back, my piece of advice on that is every time you think that you have to come back to work because things are going to fall apart if you're not there, you can definitely still take that extra 2 days off. Like things are not going to, that's my thing is like, if I could just have inserted, I went on lots of trips, we went on, family things or work related things, just add a day to your trip. It doesn't make a difference. You might think it's going to make a difference to be back in the office or back at the computer for that extra 24 hours. Like, no, just enjoy, just stay in San Diego for an extra day or whatever. Like, it's worth it.
Never a bad time to be in San Diego. I want to touch on another thing you mentioned about the DEI component, because you mentioned there is a huge outsized impact that VCs make. I mean, billions upon billions of dollars each year goes into it, and it's, pretty notoriously a straight white male's game, both on the who gives the funds and who receives the funds. So I think it was female founders receive 2.2% of total VC, Black and Latin founders 2.6%, like basically around that ballpark. And my theory is that really will only change when the composition of VC firms change, and there are some initiatives that are put in place to consciously work towards rectifying some of those huge gulfs and disparities. So I say this knowing that Squadra has been doing really cool initiatives and work in the space. So what kind of initiatives can VCs take in order to both get more underrepresented groups, both on their team and also in their portfolio?
I think that in the past, there has been the path to being a VC is going and working on Wall Street, going into finance, and really being the number cruncher person. I think that because so much of that is more commoditized now, like you can get an excellent person, a person who's excellent at spreadsheets from many different paths. And that's also something that's sort of, I don't want to say it's like outsourceable, but it's not the core competency anymore that you need to be a good investor. It's not just about running the numbers. So I think, and this is not, I'm not to talk about myself as having been an entrepreneur, but you look at some of the most revered venture funds now, they were all founders first. Two interesting things that I have read recently. A VC who's giving it, any VC you talk to, you need to decide if the advice they're giving you is advice that they heard someone else give or advice that they lived. And the second thing is you should, quote, only take money from funds where the partners actually have invested in the fund themselves, where there are significant, more than at minimum of 10% of the money that's in the fund is their own, because they will make decisions in far different ways and more critically than people who are just spending other people's money. Even in our region, so like me and Guy, 10 years ago, 7 years ago, we were both founders, and now we're both investors. And so we are investing from a mentality that's much more entrepreneur focused and much more empathetic with the journey of the entrepreneur. And so all that being said, this comes back to like how you as founders are investing in the diversity of your own teams as you build them. Because someone out there on your team, maybe it's person number 7, 5 more years from now, after you guys have had a great exit and whatever, they are the next investor. They're sitting on the other side of the table. They're the LP in the fund. And that's how it's like, this is how we get to systemic change. One of the programs that we've invested in and sort of helped bring to Baltimore is the HBCU VC program. And so that's a curriculum for students from historically Black colleges and universities that they go through, and then they are placed in venture funds across the country. And so we worked with HBCU VC because we are lucky enough that their COO actually is from Baltimore. So she was very excited to get a footprint in her hometown. And so we worked to have 12 student VCs placed across 10 firms in our region. And for the year. So, and we'll continue, and that we hope that number continues to grow, and then we have more funds involved. And the lesson from that is really sometimes when you want to do something good, it's important to stop and say, who else should I ask to come on this ride with me? Because often, just like people say, like, oh, no one wants to be the first to write the check, people don't always want to be the first to do the thing. And that goes across the board for anything. So by saying, hey, like, this is a program that we're going to take 2 students, can we get 10 other volunteers to take a, quote, not even take a risk, but just like who else will spend some money to help, enrich our VC community with students from our local universities. And so I took an email and a 30-minute meeting with a whole group of people, and we got 10 other funds to contribute to be involved. It's like, how do you get momentum, right? Like, this is the function of inertia. Like, if you get enough people committed to doing something, it starts moving faster.
Yeah, I mean, especially in Baltimore, it's such a tight knit. I mean, Smaltimore comes into play a lot, but I think especially in the founder and VC community, like, it's very much, I won't say the usual suspects, but in a good way, right? The people that I think are the ones actively trying to make this change and put something real. We had huge news recently with Pinkaloo Technologies, right? Just had a successful exit through acquisition.
Yes.
So I'm curious, what is that day like for a VC when one of their portfolio companies get acquired, and what role, if any, do you as the investor play in that whole acquisition negotiation process?
I learned a ton in this process, having not gone through this myself. but the big thing, it's like making sure that everything is actually in line. Like there's a huge amount of intent. So this, just to give a sense of timeline in this cone of safety, this process started in October for them. So that's when they had started. So their acquirer had been a customer partner, and they approached them and said, look, like we are so obsessed with what you're doing, and we have this whole other technology infrastructure and stack that we sell to the same customers as you do. We want to bring you in-house. And so to go from October to March was truly 6 months of diligence, going back and forth, everything from, very intense legal review to making sure that we had done everything, the company had done everything appropriately over the last 4 years of their existence, to an extremely detailed code review into going line by line, looking at the security of the infrastructure, like every single little thing. No rock was left unturned, if that's the right metaphor to use or analogy to use there. It's a negotiation, and it's a big relationship build. So, excellent, exciting for everybody, and we're looking forward to. I think that like when we celebrate, will be, I think, 60 days in, when everybody knows what their new job is, because they acquired the whole team. So that 14 people that all are learning their new job and seeing where they fit in. And like when I know that the culture match is good and that people are getting their groove on what these new roles are and what the way forward to executing on the mission. That's the other thing. For Pinkaloo, this was the ultimate way for them to win at executing on their mission. And that was what really drove the decision.
It sounds like a very, very exciting time, but there's still dust that needs to settle, right, before you can truly make sure. But it sounds, all accounts, like it's going great.
Yeah.
So I just have a few more questions about team building, because I think that's something that I associate you with as someone that helps to build really good teams. And I was checking out, leaving no rock unturned. I was checking your Twitter bio, and it says you're helping to build great companies and great teams at Squadra. What's the difference? What's like the gulf between a great team and to a great company?
I think I feel like some people would say you have to be both to win. I think that there are a lot of great companies and great ideas out there that never get to achieve what they could, never reach their full potential, because they don't invest in having a great team and a great culture. I think even within our own portfolio right now, we have a company of brilliant, amazing people who they have a black hole of creativity, because for being a startup, they're lacking in innovation, because the team that they've hired is all the same. They're all the same people 1 degree off. And it's almost like a moment when there's no friction. So there's like, how can you actually be accelerating? So even in that, I think I read this question and I intentionally didn't overthink about it when you sent it to me, because I wanted to give an authentic answer that wasn't overthought, but I do want to think about it a lot. But I think, I don't know, a great company can be made up of people who don't matter and aren't going to have an impact in where they are. I think this is something that I thought about a lot. It's, and I think the other thing is people throw the word like, oh, it's a great company, it's a great idea around all the time, but people don't really talk about how great someone's team is, because it's not often as true. So like great company maybe means potential or revenue that they're generating or their relationship with their customers. But it's, I don't know. This is like people would say Uber's a great company, but they sure were not a great team.
Not a great leadership team. So the last thing I'll ask is about advice for creating solid working relationships with teams. So a lot you also mentioned, and I think it's true, pretty much everyone here is friends with their co-founders. That's just the state of the game when you're starting out. I mean, that person you have a relationship before you found. But how do you create a good working relationship with a friend so that you can keep friendship intact and personal lives intact, but also you can do what's best for the company in these, especially in the early stages?
So the best thing to do with this is like you have to sit down and have an intentional conversation about it. Like, what's the team we're trying to build? What's our culture we're going to be? What do we value? Like, what actually matters to us in what we're doing? Like, what's our why?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that is a really impactful way to do this is actually called a team charter, which is sort of like your, it's like your manifesto, your ethos of like, here's who we are and what we're going to do. But that's sort of like people talk a lot about, like, you need to really set your mission, vision, and values. And I am a huge believer that each one of you, it doesn't matter how early you are, should establish your mission, vision, and values. They can always change, but if you never document them, they don't exist. There's no way for someone else to learn them. So the team charter is sort of going into the next level. So that way it's establishing, here's my working style. And this is the things that it's almost like thinking about your first roommate. What were the things that you two really had to sit down and have a hard talk about because they drove you insane and you were literally going to like move out or throw them out a window? Those are the things that you will have with your co-founders eventually. Is these things that like, and if you don't talk about them, they just eat you up inside and people get really mad and frustrated and you have this big fight. But taking the time to say, even for me, like if we were working on a team together, even for a project, just like a couple month project, Kevin, I would say, you do not want to talk to me before 8:30 a.m. You just don't. Like I'm awake at 7, but you do not want to have a call with me before 8:30. And I work best if I need I need a long window of time. And I like to have that window of time between like 5 and 8 o'clock p.m. is when I will like be my most productive if I need to crank something out. And so even something like that, like now you know 2 really good things about not only like what I like, but how you should get when you need something from me, when you should ask.
Mm-hmm.
So like, oh, Margaret's probably it's the right time to bring something up to her at like 11 o'clock in the morning. She's highly caffeinated and she's not in the middle of something big. And she's probably going to be in a really good mood. So it's just even these like little, and it's actually documenting that out so that it's scalable, right? So if Mohammed joined our team, he'd be like, okay, like Steph, don't call Margaret before 8:30. How long would it take someone to find that out if it wasn't written out on a piece of paper and they knew? So it's like, so this is like a big exercise that goes, it's not a big exercise. It's just, it takes, this is an hour conversation that you need to have and document it out. And then I think the other thing is just being able to know when people need a break. And maybe that's just a day, maybe that's a weekend without stuff, maybe it's just 15 minutes, but being able to say, like, I know that, like, trust me enough to know that I can see that you're fried, like, take the weekend or take an hour, let's go for a walk and talk about something else. It's just like, how do you manage, because everything is so heightened. It's like, how do you manage people's energy and recharge them? That's probably the, like, what, and and also having that in your charters, like what recharges me. So like for me, Margaret is I am recharged by seeing people socially and doing something that has nothing to do with work. And I am recharged by going for a walk with my dog with no music or headphones or anything on. I just want to like walk and not talk to anybody. And I don't want my mom to tell me while I'm in the walk because it totally derails my recharge. But
it's great. It sounds, it's just communication, right? It's being trusting each other enough or feeling vulnerable / just knowing that if you don't say what you need or what you need to get out of something, that no one will know. We're not mind readers. So I think
everything is about the relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
The relationship with your VC, the relationship with your co-founders, the relationship with your first employees, the relationship with your potential acquirer. It's all people. This whole thing is about people.
I think that is good life and startup advice wrapped into one. Margaret, thank you so much again for your time. It's a shame we couldn't get you in front of the whiteboard in our space. Keep up all the great work in the Baltimore innovation ecosystem through Squadra, through any other ventures you'll be supporting or working on. And I just, on behalf of the cohort, want to thank you for sharing your time and expertise here today.
Yes, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to staying in touch with all of you. So, in order to find me, I'm very excited to hear about all of your ventures too when we get to that point. So, thanks everyone.
Alrighty guys, that's it for today's episode. I promise as we get back into in-person interviews, we have a lot in store. Erica will be back on this podcast. She has not left the building. We're just trying to get through these pre-recorded podcasts first for you guys, since there's a lot of information to glean that we thought would be great to share with our listeners. And we also have to introduce you guys to our new student program coordinator, but keeping my lips sealed until we get there. But until then, make sure that you stay tuned for more episodes from us and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're listening to this on Podbean, we have the visuals on YouTube, and vice versa. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to check out our Podbean, both of which will be linked down below. And we will talk to you guys next time. Bye guys.